The Simpsons writers are historically pretty critical of Republicans.
That's actually an accurate depiction of Republican headquarters.
It's actually too easy on them. It used to be edgy. Now it's just like a documentary.
So they might be surprised to learn that, after over 30 years on the air, Republicans look upon the show quite fondly.
I love The Simpsons and watched it faithfully for years.
So how did a show that portrays the Republican Party like this end up beloved by Republicans?
You know, I was watching The Simpsons the other day.
Part 1, Simpsons Family Values. While The Simpsons may have seemed shocking to conservatives when it first premiered, that was, well, a very long time ago. It's a pretty old show, which means some very fundamental parts of its DNA are incredibly old-fashioned by today's standards. Like Marge doesn't have a job. Homer is the sole breadwinner of the family. The family says grace before dinner every night, and they go to church together every Sunday. While subversive, this sort of depiction of the American family would obviously come to appeal to conservatives after so many decades on the air. Look at how conservative favorite Jordan Peterson incorporates the show into one of his lectures.
Homer and Marge are going to buy some Christmas presents, but Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus. And so he's absolutely crushed by that. He suffers dreadfully as a consequence of not being able to fulfill his responsibility. Well, that's for men. Women have their sets of responsibilities. They're not the same.
Yeah, yikes.
They're structured differently than men.
As much as the writers would obviously reject that sexist takeaway from the show, they're nonetheless shackled to this decades-old archetype of the traditional nuclear family that folks like Jordan Peterson can point to as evidence for outdated gender ideas. But beyond familial politics, the show's handling of US politics is also rife for conservative reinterpretation. Part 2, Distrust of Politicians. During a conservative era of American government, Simpsons creator Matt Groening was openly disdainful of politicians in his comic strip, Life in Hell. While his comics make his very left-leaning politics abundantly clear, part of that worldview meant skewering Democrats just as much as Republicans, in an era where the Democratic Party became much more conservative. So naturally, how that came across in The Simpsons was to make fun of all politicians.
Didn't you wonder why you were getting checks for doing absolutely nothing?
I figured because the Democrats were in power again.
Basically showing the whole system as corrupt and both parties as bad. Like in this iconic Season 8 Treehouse of Horror segment, which has some of the most enduring political satire the show has ever done.
Take a good look at your beloved candidates. They're nothing but hideous space reptiles. What are you going to do about it? It's a two-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a two-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a third-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away.
So, lots to unpack here. While a lot of the satire may be spot on, it definitely sends the message that the political system can't be trusted. And it's clear that this scene stuck with at least one prominent Republican, as it's one of several episodes quoted, or misquoted, by Senator Ted Cruz in his infamous BuzzFeed video.
And always twirling for freedom.
While the show absolutely ragged on Republicans a lot more than Democrats, the sum effect here is a clear distrust of all politicians and the work of government in general.
Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos.
Go!
A worldview that, without a doubt, appeals a whole lot more to Republicans of today. And it's not just episodes from the Clinton era of so-called neoliberalism. The show's blanket distrust of politics lasted well into the 2000s, like in this season 19 episode, where Springfield holds the first presidential primary in 2008.
Is everyone here as sick of those stupid politicians as I am? Why don't we all pick the most ridiculous candidate and write him in?
Springfield hates the candidates from both parties so much that they end up rallying behind Ralph Wiggum. He's an ignorant, outsider candidate with no political experience and no aptitude for the job. Sound familiar? Remember, this is in 2008, long before Trump was running for president.
To make this country great again.
Yeah, wow. And I'm not saying that the Simpsons writers support Trump. They've made it abundantly clear that they do not. But I do think that this sort of all government is terrible satire is exactly the sort of thing that helped lay the groundwork for a figure like Trump to rise.
I'm voting for Ralph too, but don't tell you know who.
But while this aspect of the show's satire may inadvertently resemble modern anti-government attitudes, not every conservative inkling the show had came from the show's roots of skewering politicians. Part 3, John Swartzwelder. While Matt Groening may be openly liberal and the writer's room generally pretty left-leaning, the show is far from monolithic politically, Enter John Swartzwelder, the show's most prolific writer. Swartzwelder was fundamental in establishing the wacky tone of the show early on, and is heralded as one of, if not the greatest writer in the show's history. He's also a reclusive, staunch libertarian. It's even speculated he was the inspiration for the character Ron Swanson, since they share similar political views and even bear a passing resemblance. So while the show's generally liberal worldview did typically win out over Swartzwelder's more conservative views, his libertarianism did shine through in certain episodes that he wrote. Season 9's classic episode, The Cartridge Family, is a prime example of this. This episode sees violence break out in Springfield, inspiring Homer to buy a handgun. At first glance, this storyline might come off as opposed to gun ownership, as Homer is depicted as being a completely reckless, dangerous buffoon with a handgun. However, the end of the episode sees the other gun owners of Springfield coming to the family's rescue. It's basically a Second Amendment wet dream of an ending. Overall, the point of the episode seems to be that irresponsible gun ownership, like Homer's, is bad, but the good guy with a gun sect is entirely necessary for a safe society. An episode like this is honestly pretty out of step with the show's usual sensibilities. But it wasn't just Swartzwelder who wanted the episode to avoid being overly anti-gun. The show's head writer at the time, Mike Scully, said this on the episode's commentary.
We didn't want just like the message to be guns are bad or, that.
I did. I gotta say, I'm a total left-wing, anti-gun, hating hunters, all that stuff. I really hate this stuff.
So even with the show's creator actively protesting the episode's more middle-of-the-road handling of gun control, Swartzwelder and Scully won out. And Mike Scully is no conservative himself, but this episode from his time in charge of the show endures in Republican circles.
Look it up, it's in the Cartridge Family episode.
Like in this bizarre moment from the 2018 Conservative Political Action Conference.
Homer points out that guns are for things like protecting your family, hunting delicious animals, and making sure that the King of England never shows up to push you around.
All good things.
Lisa's response to this is to say that, well, Dad, it's actually a relic, a remnant of the Revolutionary War era. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. What do you say to that?
I think the Democrats are the party of Lisa Simpson. And Republicans are happily the party of Homer and Bart and Maggie and Marge.
Maybe Ted Cruz missed the part of the episode that portrayed Homer as a gun-toting moron? But intentionally right-leaning content from Swartzwelder isn't the only satire from the show's old episodes that modern Republicans may cling to. Part 4, Shit That Hasn't Aged Well, or Pandemics, Vaccines, Trans Women in Sports, QAnon, and more. When you've been on TV as long as The Simpsons, there are bound to be things that don't age well. The obvious example is the controversy surrounding Apu, which some conservatives were quick to rail against as an example of cancel culture.
There's a race row with the longest running TV show in America, my favorite, The Simpsons.
But there are some neutral or even liberal episodes from The Simpsons' past that eerily line up with certain Republican talking points in a way the writers may be uncomfortable with, including right-wing conspiracies and histrionics about the coronavirus vaccine.
I'm not vaccinated, and I'm not getting the vaccine because I'm an American.
Like this season 12 episode, where Homer, as a parody of conservative blogger Matt Drudge, starts spewing lies on his website in order to get clicks. Sounds like liberal satire so far, only to inadvertently land on an actual conspiracy involving, you guessed it, mind control through vaccines.
I'm referring to the flu shot expose. You see, we're the ones loading them with mind-controlling additives.
Yeah, I know.
They're controlling our minds with flu shots. I knew it. Well, kids, now aren't you glad we don't believe in inoculations?
The point of this very silly episode is to show how absurd that kind of conspiracy is, but future episodes would be much more subtle in a way that would ultimately come back to haunt them. The beginning of a season 22 episode once again taps into the deep state medical conspiracy well, but this time striking dangerously close to actual modern conspiracy theories.
I'd like to call to order this secret conclave of America's media empires. We're here to come up with the next phony baloney crisis to put Americans back where they belong, in dark rooms, glued to their televisions, too terrified to skip the commercials. I think we should go with a good old-fashioned public health scare.
A new disease. No one's immune.
We do have standards. This can't be a made-up disease. The only moral thing to do is release a deadly virus into the general public.
So if you know anything about online conspiracies, you know that, of course, people on the internet, a decade later, were quick to point to this episode as evidence of a vast COVID-19 conspiracy that the Simpsons writers were aware of. And unlike the flu vaccine episode, it doesn't go so over the top to make it abundantly clear to the audience that they're making fun of the idea of this sort of conspiracy theory. Stuff like this is what has led conspiracy theorists to think The Simpsons is an example of so-called predictive programming. Reuters even did a great fact-checking article debunking this whole idea as it surrounds The Simpsons, because most Simpsons predicted it theories are BS. But there's plenty of other instances of the once liberal-appearing satire from the show seeming to be flipped on its head when viewed through a modern lens. Like in season 6, when Republican Sideshow Bob used dead people's votes to commit voter fraud to win an election, which is exactly the bogus accusation some Republicans made against Joe Biden following the 2020 election. Same goes for the Treehouse of Horror, where an electronic voting machine repeatedly changed Homer's vote from Barack Obama to John McCain. Exactly what bad faith actors on the right accused Dominion voting systems of doing in 2020, but to cheat for the Democrat over the Republican. And then there's the show's brilliant satire of misleading, predatory media outlets, which, viewed today, seems an awful lot like a screed against cancel culture.
I don't know Homer Simpson. I never met Homer Simpson or had any contact with him, but I'm sorry, I can't go on.
That's okay. Your tears say more than real evidence ever could.
Or season 16's episode in favor of legalizing gay marriage that was celebrated by GLAAD at the time, but that also featured a bizarrely transphobic twist where it turns out Patty's girlfriend turned fiance was actually, according to the episode, a man dressing as a woman in order to be competitive in women's sports. Sounds a lot like the sort of boogeyman you hear about in Republican state houses a lot in 2021.
This bill is about a biological and scientific difference between men and women.
Trans issues were just so not on the minds of Hollywood liberals back in the 2000s, when the big liberal issue of the day was legalizing gay marriage. So they totally fumbled their attempt at a pro-LGBTQ episode.
Veronica is a man.
With numerous episodes that seem way more conservative than they were intended, it's no surprise some Republicans today would be drawn to this show. And that, plus having John Swartzwelder behind the scenes, old school family values, and the show's distrust of authority, it makes sense that someone like Ted Cruz would love The Simpsons.
I think Homer Simpson is an everyman. Bart, you saw a lot of people on the left blasting Bart, all right, fine, so he's a teenage delinquent. He loves to be free. He doesn't want a whole bunch of sanctimonious Seymour Skinners running his life. I think that's a libertarian sentiment that I'm proud is reflected in the Republican Party.
All this isn't to say that The Simpsons doesn't have plenty of liberal fans. It absolutely does. And at the end of the day, The Simpsons absolutely is a liberal series.
But the show's many decades on the air have left plenty of content for Republicans to eat up, even as the show continues to do scenes like this.
Seeing all that horror and poverty makes me think we should lower the corporate tax rate even further.
Agreed.
So what do you think? Have Republicans successfully co-opted the show's liberal satire as the show's classic years get more and more antiquated? Or does The Simpsons succeed in offering its left-wing perspective, despite some conservative relics in its past? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more video analysis of our favorite family.